In this video, I'll show you how I made this wooden gift box. This one is sized specifically to hold a fancy wine bottle opener, which makes a nice gift. So let's get started. I'm starting with a piece of walnut that's about 3 feet long and 9 inches wide. I first straighten up one edge on the joiner, and then on the table saw, I cut a width that I'll use for the top and bottom of the box. I'm going to make the top and bottom with the book face grain, so this is a rough width that's roughly about half the length of the box. And then I cut it to rough length on the miter saw. Using the bandsaw, I resaw it down the middle. The bottom of the box and the lid will both be 1/4 inch thick, and this piece was 3/4 inches thick. So now I have two pieces, each about 3/8 inch thick, that I can glue together to get the book match grain for the full width that's needed for the bottom piece and for the lid. This total length will be cut into 3 pieces to make the lid and the bottom. My plan was to glue up the entire length without cutting it first, mainly so it'll be a little easier running through the planer after glue up, less snipe and whatnot. However, as I'm getting ready to glue it up here, I decided that the warping of the board is maybe a little too much for this long glue up. So I cut 1/3 of the length off to use for the bottom, and then leave a length of the other 2 pieces for the lid of the box. Just a side note here with a better explanation for what I mean by the 2 pieces for the lid. You can see here that the top is really just 1 piece in the final box. However, I laminated 2 pieces together with the grain running perpendicular to make the slide out lid. This is hopefully to avoid any warping or cupping of the lid over time. Hopefully that helps explain it. Now back to the build. So I glue up the pieces for the bottom and also for the lid, just being careful to keep it really flat. While the glue's drying on that, I start on the sides of the box. The width that I'm cutting here is the final size of the height of the box plus the width of the kerf of my saw blade. I'm going to make another cut later, so I want to reserve a little bit of width for that. So this piece of wood is 3/4 inches thick, but I want the sides of the box to be 1/2 inch thick. I could just create some sawdust with the planer and plane it down, but I decided to first slice off a thin piece on the bandsaw. I end up with a piece of veneer that I don't need for this project, but I'll save it for something in the future. Then I can get the final width for the side pieces of 1/2 inch using the planer. I want to cut each side piece of the box in succession to get a continuous grain, and since this is a rectangular box, not a square, then I have to alternate cutting long and short pieces. So I cut them first on the miter saw, just a 90-degree cut for now, and pretty close to final length, just cheating a little bit longer, maybe less than 1/16 of an inch longer, and alternating long and short. I set my table saw to exactly 45 degrees, and using the crosscut sled, I can cut both long pieces with the same stop block setting, and then cut both of the short pieces with the same stop block setting. And I just can't resist doing the YouTube tape it together trick to see that all the angles add up. So at this point I cut one saw blade kerf off of the 3 sides that are not the front, but I don't cut the one that is the front, or the one that has the lid slide out. I'll cut that one later when cutting the handle for the lid. To cut the 1/4 inch dados for the bottom and the lid, I use a dado stack on my table saw. I cut the slots for both the bottom and the lid on all 4 pieces with the same setting. Okay, so just taking a look at where we stand here, because I cut one saw blade kerf off of the 3 sides but not the front face, and then used the same saw settings on all 4 pieces, I end up with this offset on the edge of the box that'll have the lid slide out. The offset is exactly 1 saw blade kerf, so now I'm going to cut right along the bottom edge of this slot to cut off the handle for the lid. To set the fence just at the right width, I use one of the side pieces as a guide. Then I raise the saw blade up, and I decide just at the last minute that there's a risk of the handle cut off might get nicked or damaged, since there's a pretty decent sized gap in my blade guard. So I decided to use the crosscut sled instead, setting the stop block using one of the side pieces, the same as I did earlier on the fence, and then cutting the lid of the handle off. And just checking now that everything lines up, and I'm a happy camper. When the glue is dry on the bottom piece, I use the planer to get it flat and to the right thickness, and then cut it to the right width and length on the table saw. I sand the inside of all the pieces and then the box is ready for glue up. Some painter's tape will help with the cleanup of the glue and all the inside corners. Let the glue soak in for about 5 minutes, and then I fold the box together. And I use a strap clamp to apply some pressure to the joints. And after cleaning up the glue squeeze out, I set that aside to dry and go to work on the lid piece. I rough cut the lid piece that I glued up earlier into 2 pieces, which I didn't get captured on camera. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to laminate these 2 pieces with the grain perpendicular so that the lid doesn't warp over time. With a good spread of glue and a lot of clamps, I set that aside to dry overnight. Just removing the lid from the clamps when the glue is dry, and over to the planer to get the right thickness. And then I use the table saw to cut it down to the proper width and length. With a good sanding, the lid is ready to go. I'm using some CA glue to attach the handle to the lid. I really should have used the gel CA glue and not this thin runny stuff. Just making sure it's properly aligned to the right fit, and then I hold it tight until the glue dries. Then I add a little extra glue along the bottom edge. This time I'm using a gel CA glue. After sanding the entire box and the lid to 220 grit sandpaper, it's ready to finish. I'm using a hard wax oil to finish it with. After wiping it on, I let it dry for about an hour and then buff off the excess. Thanks so much for watching.